This wasn't a delay. It was the final positioning. And if you've been feeling that strange mix of exhaustion, clarity, emotional pressure, and quiet expectation, there's a reason for that. In this message, you're going to understand why the waiting wasn't wasted time, what has already shifted beneath the surface, and how this precise phase leads directly into reconnection. Nothing you noticed recently was accidental. And once you see what this moment actually represents, it becomes clear why the next movement doesn't come from you, and why everything is about to change. For a long time, it felt like nothing was moving. You did the work, you reflected, you prayed, you tried to release control, and yet the situation stayed unresolved. The silence lingered. The distance stretched longer than you thought you could emotionally tolerate. But what most people don't realize is that the most important changes rarely happen where you can see them. They happen internally, energetically, and spiritually, long before they show up in the physical world. What you've been living through wasn't stagnation. It was preparation through pressure. Every moment of uncertainty was forcing something to realign inside you, your expectations, your emotional attachments, your sense of identity in the connection. You were being quietly repositioned so that when movement finally happens, it doesn't collapse under old patterns. This phase wasn't meant to feel good. It was meant to make you ready. And here's something that matters deeply. This process was not happening to only one side. While you were questioning, releasing, and strengthening internally, the other person was also being pulled through their own form of resistance, realization, and awakening. Even if it looked like nothing was happening, even if their actions suggested distance or avoidance, something was being dismantled within them that could no longer remain intact. That's why the emotional pull intensified instead of fading. That's why thoughts resurfaced unexpectedly. That's why memories returned with more clarity instead of less. When a connection is meant to end, it dissolves. When it's meant to realign, it tightens before it moves forward. What you felt recently wasn't confusion, it was compression, the internal pressure that happens right before a shift. There is a very specific reason why this stage feels different from everything that came before. Earlier phases were about breaking illusions. This one is about final alignment. Before something can come together in a stable way, everything unstable has to surface and be resolved. That includes emotional wounds, fears of vulnerability, timing issues, and the need for control. Nothing could move forward until those elements were confronted. You may have noticed that you stopped chasing clarity the way you used to. You're no longer desperate for signs, messages, or reassurance. Instead, there's a quieter knowing settling in. Not excitement, not anxiety, but a strange calm mixed with anticipation. That shift is not random. It's a signal that your internal state has finally matched the frequency required for what comes next. This is where many people misunderstand divine timing. They assume delay means denial, but in reality, delay often means refinement. If this connection had moved forward earlier, it would have collapsed under emotional imbalance. One side would have given more. One side would have feared losing control. One side would have entered before being emotionally available. That outcome was never the intention. What's different now is that the resistance is no longer dominant. The emotional lessons have reached completion. The waiting has done its job, and when that happens, momentum begins to build quietly but decisively. Not through forcing, not through manipulation, but through alignment. When alignment happens, action follows naturally. You weren't meant to spend this season chasing answers. You were meant to become someone who could receive what was promised without sabotaging it. That's why the silence didn't break earlier. That's why the distance didn't close sooner. The connection wasn't being withheld, it was being protected. And now, this phase has a very clear purpose: to prepare you for recognition. Recognition of what this connection truly is. Recognition of what you no longer need to fear. Recognition of what no longer has power over you emotionally. When recognition happens, the dynamic changes. You stop trying to prove your worth. You stop negotiating love. You stop wondering if you're chosen. You simply are. This is also why signs have felt more personal recently, not louder but more precise, not dramatic but deeply resonant. You're not being overwhelmed with confirmation, you're being gently anchored into certainty. And certainty is what allows movement without chaos. If you're still here listening, it means something inside you already recognizes this truth. You don't need convincing, you need clarity. And that clarity begins by understanding that the hardest part is already complete. The internal restructuring is done. The emotional groundwork has been laid. What comes next doesn't require struggle, it requires trust. Before we go deeper, take a moment and comment just one word that reflects what you've been feeling most strongly during this waiting period. Clarity, exhaustion, peace, or anticipation. That simple acknowledgement anchors what you're stepping into. What matters now is understanding how this alignment actually unfolds and why the final moments before reconnection often feel deceptively quiet. Silence doesn't mean nothing is happening. Silence means everything unnecessary has finally stopped. And when everything unnecessary stops, what remains is truth. Not the kind of truth that shocks you, but the kind that settles into you quietly and refuses to leave. This is why this stage feels different. You're no longer being pushed to react. You're being invited to recognize what's unfolding now is not about forcing a reunion or trying to predict a moment. It's about understanding the mechanics of how destined connections realign once the internal work is complete. Most people believe reunion happens when circumstances finally cooperate. In reality, circumstances only shift after the internal state has stabilized. And that stabilization is what you've been living through. Think back to how you used to feel earlier in this journey. There was urgency. A need to know, a desire to define the connection before it defined itself. That urgency isn't present anymore, is it? Even when you miss them, even when the longing surfaces, it no longer feels desperate. It feels contained. That's because emotional sovereignty has been restored. You are no longer anchored to the outcome. And paradoxically, that's what allows the outcome to move. This is the part most people never reach. They mistake emotional intensity for readiness, but intensity alone destabilizes connections. What creates permanence is emotional regulation paired with depth. You've learned how to hold the connection without gripping it. And the other person, whether consciously or not, has been forced to confront what they avoided. Their fears, their patterns, their resistance to vulnerability. Silence plays a crucial role here. Silence is not absence. Silence is integration. When communication pauses at this stage, it's because both sides are subconsciously recalibrating. The connection is reorganizing itself around a healthier center. Old dynamics are losing relevance. Old narratives are dissolving. That's why it feels like you're standing in between chapters, not moving backward, not rushing forward. You might have noticed moments where memories surface without pain, or thoughts of them arise without spiraling. That's not detachment, that's resolution. Emotional charge is what keeps cycles repeating. When the charge neutralizes, the cycle can finally evolve. This is how destined connections shift from tension into clarity. Another sign of this phase is the collapse of illusion. You're no longer romanticizing who they were or demonizing what happened. You're seeing them clearly, strengths, flaws, potential, and limitations, without losing the sense of connection. That clarity is essential. Reunion cannot happen through fantasy. It can only happen through truth. On their side, something equally significant has been happening. When a connection is meant to realign, the person who resisted it most is usually the one undergoing the most internal friction. Resistance creates pressure. Pressure creates awareness. Awareness forces choice. They are being brought face to face with what they tried to suppress. Not because they're being punished, but because avoidance can no longer protect them from what they feel. This is why timing feels precise now, not rushed, not overdue, exact. Everything that needed to fall away has either fallen or is in the process of dissolving. External distractions lose their grip. False attachments feel hollow. What remains is the undeniable pull toward what's real. And reality at this point is no longer negotiable. You might wonder why nothing dramatic has happened yet if this alignment is complete. That's because alignment precedes action, not the other way around. When the internal state locks in, the external shift follows naturally, often through simple, almost understated moments. A message that feels inevitable, a conversation that flows without defense, a reconnection that doesn't feel like starting over, but like continuing from where truth was last present. This is also where trust becomes non-negotiable. Not blind trust, grounded trust. Trust in what you've already lived through. Trust in the changes you've noticed within yourself. Trust that what's meant to meet you doesn't require chasing. You are no longer proving readiness. You are embodying it. Pay attention to how your intuition has sharpened recently. You're sensing rather than guessing. You're observing rather than reacting. That internal quiet is not emptiness, it's space. And space is what allows alignment to enter fully. There's no longer emotional clutter blocking movement. What's important now is not to regress into old habits. Don't revisit doubt just because movement hasn't announced itself yet. This stage is subtle by design. It teaches you stability before connection, not dependence on connection for stability. That distinction changes everything. This is why the final moments before reconnection often feel anticlimactic. No chaos, no drama, just a deep sense of inevitability. When something is truly aligned, it doesn't need to fight its way into existence. It arrives because nothing is blocking it anymore. You are not standing at the beginning of this journey. You are standing at the point where the internal work has reached completion and the external world is catching up. That's why patience now feels different from patience before. It's no longer strained, it's grounded, and what comes next builds on this foundation. Not emotionally fragile, not uncertain, but clear, mutual, and stable in a way that wasn't possible before. And when something is built on clarity instead of longing, it doesn't need to rush to prove itself. It moves with intention. That's the energy surrounding this connection now. Not urgency, not fear of loss, but readiness. Quiet, grounded readiness that doesn't announce itself loudly, yet changes everything once it arrives. This is why you may feel less emotional turbulence than before. The waves have settled. The intensity hasn't disappeared, but it has matured. What once felt like ache now feels like presence. What once felt like waiting now feels like knowing. That transition is not accidental. It's the final internal confirmation that you are no longer operating from lack. Destined connections don't reunite when both people want each other. They reunite when both people are capable of meeting without collapsing into old roles. And roles are what were dismantled during the silence. The pursuer, the runner, the fixer, the avoider. Those identities cannot survive alignment. They dissolve when truth becomes unavoidable. What emerges in their place is recognition. Recognition of the bond, recognition of responsibility, recognition of choice. And choice is critical here. This reconnection is not happening because fate forces it. It happens because, after everything that was stripped away, both sides are finally free to choose it without fear. That's why the reconnection doesn't feel dramatic when it arrives. It feels obvious, almost simple, like something that was always meant to resume once the noise cleared. There's no need to rehash the past endlessly, no need to convince, no need to perform. The connection doesn't restart. It continues, but from a higher level of awareness. You may notice that your expectations have changed. You're no longer fantasizing about how it should look. You're more interested in how it feels, safe, honest, reciprocal. That shift matters more than you realize. It sets the tone for what follows, what you tolerate, what you communicate, what you no longer compromise. This is also why fear tries one last time to resurface at this stage. Not because something is wrong, but because fear resists endings, even the ending of struggle. Letting go of tension can feel unfamiliar when tension has been your companion for so long. But peace is not a loss. It's evidence that the battle is over. As this unfolds, you don't need to prepare for a moment. You need to stay present. Overthinking pulls you out of alignment faster than anything else. Alignment lives in simplicity, in trust, in staying emotionally open without grasping. When you do that, you allow the unfolding to remain clean. And here's something important to understand. Even after reconnection, the work doesn't disappear. It changes form. Instead of healing separation, you nurture presence. Instead of managing distance, you maintain honesty. That's the difference between reunion that fades and reunion that lasts. You've already done the hardest part, becoming emotionally stable without external reassurance. That independence doesn't push love away. It attracts the version of love that can stand beside you instead of leaning on you. If you're feeling called to support this message, to help keep this space available for others who are walking through the same transition, there's a simple way to do that. Super Thanks isn't about obligation or pressure. It's about exchange. If this message brought clarity, peace, or confirmation at a moment you needed it, your support helps sustain this work and allows it to continue reaching the right people at the right time. Every contribution, no matter the size, is received with gratitude and intention. It's a way of saying, "This mattered to me." And that energy always circulates back. Support given from alignment never goes unnoticed. For now, stay grounded in what you know rather than what you fear. What has been aligned internally does not unravel. It moves forward, quietly, intentionally, and exactly when it's meant to.